Most people, most champions do not have something that you do not have. They lack something that you have. For a champion in the physical realm, a lot of times it's they don't have an off switch. They just keep going. And so to the same degree, you probably do things every single day that you should not be doing. And so what I want to introduce to you is a concept of the anti-routine as the most productive routine that is humanly possible for you to accomplish what you want. Number one is obviously just shifting the perspective of I need to do more things and I need to add more things to my routine, when in fact you need to stop doing things that you're currently doing. All that remains is the work to be done. Priorities mean two things cannot be equally important. When you work on something, if I spend 30 minutes on both things and I say this one's more important than this one, I can say that, but that's not reality because I basically just said they were both important, which means neither of them are, which is why most people cannot get shit done because they cannot say no. You need to have a routine of saying no, an anti-routine, and that is the thing that's going to yield those outsized returns on productivity. You can't do two things with different levels of importance. It's either important or it's not important. So if you say this is the priority, then it means you do not do other things besides that thing. That is how it is a priority. That is how you literally prioritize.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more, and you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Alex Hormozi, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy. Rule number 2, set your own rules.
We think that for some reason we are doing something wrong when we are not self-caring because it is bad to not self-care because we should, we must, or else, or what. And the reason this pisses me off, the reason that I made a tweet that went viral this morning about this is that weekends are new for humans. They're not even 100 years old. 1929 in England is when the first weekend got passed by a union. And it's because people hated what they were doing for their life. And so if you want to truly give self-care, then stop hating what you do every day. Novel concept, I know. Stop hanging out with people that suck. Mind-blowing, like I said, I know. And the reason that I am so passionate about this is that I have been told throughout my entire life that I was working too much, I was not balancing the things that I was supposed to be balancing. And you know what? Who gives a shit? It's my life. I don't need to live by anyone else's rules, and neither do you, right? And so when people say you should be doing this, you are not doing X, Y, Z, just take a pause and be like, are these rules that I want to listen to? Are those your rules that you're trying to apply to my life? Because there are no rules. You can do whatever the hell you want. If you want to work for a year straight, work for a year straight. And the reason you can work for a year straight is because you like what you do. The reason these people try and project their own self-hatred for their own lives onto you is because they cannot imagine a world in which someone might actually like what they do every day and don't need an escape, a break from what their existence is on a daily basis. And so don't feel guilty for just being you. And if you don't like your life every day, rather than try and figure out and make time for self-care, it would probably be better to flip the ratio and start thinking, what can I do in my actual life to stop hating it so much that I need an escape from it, right? And that's different from like, yes, you need to sleep. Yes, you need to, rest, etc. But there's a difference between that and like, I just need a total spa day. And if that's how you relax, cool. But the thing is projecting on someone else how they should, must, need to, have to relax or do whatever, it's nonsensical. It doesn't exist, right? I wanted to make this video, even though it's short, because it just drives me bananas. If you want to work, work. If you want to take off, take off. Just don't listen to what anyone else says about what you should do for your life. You're going to die and so will they. And it's not going to matter. And in 10 generations, don't even remember your name. So do what you want. You're going to die. And that is the ultimate freedom. And for some reason, we live under these chains that we think exist, but don't. And so I think the process of growing and really making ourselves free is just simply identifying the things that don't really exist and only existed in our mind to begin with. And I think that's why self-care really bugs the shit out of me, or this whole self-care movement. It's also soft as f***. Like, just work, right? Just get it done. You need to like give yourself a bubble bath every day because like your work's so hard. Like humans have been here a very long time. We've dealt with much, much harder shit. Your, boss having a deadline the next day is not the worst that you've been through. And so as a final sign off on this, think about the hardest things that you have been through in your life. Everyone has gone through hardship. Everyone has had difficulties in childhood. Everyone has had difficulties with siblings, with parents, blah, 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 these events that shape our lives. You have been through harder shit than this. You will survive. It will be okay. You don't need to self-care. You don't need to listen to what anyone else is saying. You do you. And if that means self-care, by all means, but just don't project it on anyone else.
Rule number 3, find meaning.
I would say there are days that I feel like less energized or things like that, for sure. Not about like the big picture of like, I don't believe that this cause is not worthy. But I do think a lot of people have that too, where they're like, what I'm doing is meaningless, right? And then I get into, I think everything's meaningless, and then we can just create whatever meaning, you know, we choose to, because if we don't believe in a capital M meaning, which a lot of people disagree with, that's fine. But if you don't believe in a capital M meaning, I think that's very freeing, because then you can create a little m meaning for whatever you want. And so if you believe, you can then choose to architect your own life in whatever ways that you deem meaningful, and make the activities you do aligned with that meaning. The difference between capital M meaning and little m meaning, and this is kind of like the basis of nihilism, which people have like a very negative viewpoint around, which I'm not entirely sure about why, but like capital M meaning means that like, this is the meaning of life, period. Like for everyone, this is the meaning of life. Whereas if we say that there is no single agreed upon meaning of life, and then people say, well, then that is your big meaning of life. And I'm like, yes, you're right. I believe that there is no meaning. That is the meaning that I believe. And they're like, well, then that is the capital M. Then sure, that's my capital M meaning, is that there is no meaning. What's the implication of that? It means now that we have meaning-making machines in our brain, and so we get to create and destroy meaning as we see fit. And so if we choose an activity and we deem that goal meaningful because we think it's more interesting or it energizes us, then we can ascribe meaning to that and do more of it. And what's nice about not having capital M meaning is that that can shift, right? That might be good for a season, and then it can shift. I will say that the downside of not having capital M meaning, which I consider to be religion off the shelf, is that it's more difficult because you have no one who's saying, here's the big box of rules, you can read it, and then that way you don't have to make the decisions about it. But I think it's more difficult, but ultimately more rewarding if you have reasoning behind why you believe what you believe. Because then you have to independently come up with your own conclusions about those things. It also makes it malleable so that if you get new data or new evidence, then you can change your mind, which a lot of people, again, have difficulty with. But like if you change the information, then it would make sense that if it materially changes the outcome, that the way that you believe about something should change. And I think a lot of people identify with their beliefs as a part of themselves rather than as what I prefer to call them, which is assumptions, because they work the same way. What's the difference in belief and assumption? Not a lot, right? The only difference is just what we call the word. And so assumptions are based on things that we've observed, and then we assume something as a result. And so I would say that beliefs are just assumptions, but when you call them that, they become less tied to your identity. If you have an assumption, you don't say, you challenged my assumption. It's like, well, yeah, you challenged my assumption. Oh, that's great. I was assuming this. It must be this. And then they become much more flexible, and then we don't tie our egos into them, and I think ultimately it serves more people better in the long run.
Rule number 4, outwork yourself.
I've said this quote many times in our communities and on this channel, which is, you must outwork your self-doubt. Right? If you feel like you are not confident, then you must outwork the things that you're insecure about. If you're like, man, I'm selling these services and I'm not sure if I'm that good at them, then do more of them and don't pretend. Honesty is one of the most compelling and convicting things for persuading people, right? Saying what you are good at and what you are not good at truthfully will win you far more followers and fans and loyal customers and loyal employees than pretending. Because at the end of the day, they can feel that you are disingenuous because they know that it is hollow. They know that on the inside, you do not believe the words that are coming out of your mouth. And that is how people speak without conviction, and they cannot sway others because they have not swayed themselves, because they have lost their own respect. And so I am not the believer in buying the Ferrari when you can't afford it. I am not the believer in affording the home and paying for the home that you cannot afford because you want to pretend like this is the lifestyle that you want to be around. If you go under the guise of networking, you can still go to those places without buying a $4 million house when you're barely making, a few $100,000 a year. It doesn't make sense. I like Jay-Z's quote around this, which is, if you can't buy something twice, don't buy it once. I really like that. And so this is one of the most common questions I get from newer entrepreneurs, because they think that they have to pose on Instagram in order to get wealthy. And what it does is it conflates sequence. Jeff Bezos is famous because of what he did, not because he became famous as Jeff Bezos and then used his following to build something. Elon Musk is famous for what he's accomplished, not for being Elon Musk and then creating something as a result, right? Let the actions be the thing that gives you the fame rather than yourself, right? At least that is Alex's 2 cents in my viewpoint on the world, and I think most of Mosey Nation, you guys share that belief with me. And for those of you who are new to this channel, you're gonna get more of this type of stuff and none of the fake it till you make it nonsense. That is a sure way to be broke. And I will tell you this as a last thing. The amount of people who in 2008, when everything crashed, who were faking it until they, quote, made it, just faked it until they lost it all.
because they lost what little amount that they had because they were so overextended. But I can tell you that just about everyone can become wealthy if you choose to live on less than you make, right? And that is a ratio. Wealth is a ratio, not a number, all right? And so, anywho, if you are having struggles with this question, I would posit, I would beg of you that you build your own respect first, that you're honest with yourself first. And if you always maintain the integrity of, hey, last year we got smashed, right? This year, we'll do a little bit better. And 2 years from now, when you do even better than that, you can be truthful and people will believe you. But if you always are telling a story about how you're always doing so well, A, everyone will hate you. B, no one cares. And C, you will know that you are full of it. And at the end of the day, I think that is the only thing that we're gonna keep with us. And when we die, everyone's gonna forget about us anyways. So you might as well at least enjoy yourself while you're alive.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, develop good relationships.
We have these people that we collect, throughout our lives, and sometimes they come in, you've probably heard the saying, they're here for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. And I think, for me, a lot of people have been seasonal. And so I wanted to share that because I know that, I'm sure some of you have had a similar path to me in that I didn't have a tremendous amount of support from my parents. I think they now retroactively think they supported me because it's much easier that way. But I did not have any support from my parents for the decisions that I took until it was already beyond obvious that I was going to be successful. And that took years. And that was very hard for me at the time. I think friends fell in that same category. And so when I was having this discussion with Dean, we dove into this a little bit more. But as we, ascend towards our goals, and I don't say ascend in a literal sense in terms of like socioeconomic status or whatever, but just like we move closer towards where we want to go, and our vision and our mission in our lives become clear, it also becomes clear when you have contrast with people from your past. And I have several rules of thumb that I begin to develop around these relationships. One of them is, if I could only talk about the past with someone, they usually aren't good friends of mine because I don't really live in the past. I live in the future. I live in where I want to go, what I want to do, the things that I find interesting, or the present of the things that I find interesting today or right now, top of mind. And if I can't talk about those things with somebody, then our friendship kind of by its very nature will decline over time because there's no growth, right? Because it's only in the past. And I have felt a tremendous amount of guilt around the loss of those relationships, but I also felt a guilt of carrying them on, as in I felt like I needed to water these plants out of necessity rather than out of, some sort of exchange. Now, some people might decry that or speak against the idea of having an exchange, but I don't think that's realistic. I think that people stay in relationships because there is an exchange of value that occurs. Now, I think the difference is the strength or depth of the relationship is how long you are willing to wait for the exchange to occur. So a parent, for example, is willing to wait a very long time for a positive exchange from a child coming back to them, right? Now, and some people could make the argument that, children are a gift throughout that entire period of time, and that's awesome, and that's a perspective, whatever. But just to use the time frame as a nice thinking process, if you just met someone, if you don't feel like there's, a huge benefit to knowing them, within the immediate future, you probably don't really pursue them out. And the longer you have had positive exchanges, the longer you are willing to wait for the next one, right? It's intermittent reinforcement from a behavior standpoint, right? Like we are literally reinforced in this relationship. And the way that addiction works is the same thing, right? Like you immediately get positive hits and then you can start extending how long before you get another positive hit, which is also how abusive relationships work, right? Like abuse, positive, and then like abuse and then positive is a little bit later and then a little bit later until the point where there's almost no positive whatsoever. I'm not saying that's how you should run relationships, but more so how we work as humans. The point of me breaking this down is that I have lost a lot of the friends, or almost all of the friends that I had when I started my journey. And the upside is
people will come into your life to fill the vacuum that the other people left. But sometimes it doesn't happen immediately. And I think getting comfortable with having space is a good thing. And a lot of people have the impulse or urge to always have people around them. And I think it's to their own detriment. Because I think if you can spend time alone with your thoughts and be okay with just being you without other people, then you are more selective. And it's the same way with dating. Some people can't be alone. Some people can't be without a significant other. And so they just end up shacking up with the first person they see after they become single again, right? And it's because they have a fear of being alone more than they have an aligned mission with someone that they think that this person is really the best pick. And so a lot of ways are similar to dating with friends in that we can hold out and really just pick the best people. And I think that if we, at least for me, if I have 2 or 3 good friends, I'm more than satisfied. My cup is very full. But I think where I feel drained is where I feel like I have lots and lots and lots of acquaintances that are transactional in nature, but purely transactional, or at least they have a much shorter time horizon for the transactions to occur. And so I say all this to say, if you have lost friends during the process of the climb, I don't think it is something that you should lament or be upset about. I think that it is a sign of growth. Because a lot of people say, hey, you've changed. And the only natural response that I can have to that is, you haven't. And I think that that's kind of sums up the entirety of this video, which is, if you grow, you change. Some people, most people, don't like change, especially if they themselves have not grown or changed, and or if they have grown in a different direction from you. And it is natural for us to not want to continue relationships with people that have grown or have values that are too far in contrast to our own. And those values can change over time.
Rule number 6, do things your way.
I feel passionately about my viewpoint of the world, mostly because I struggled and I was in so much pain for such a long period of time. I'm only sharing this despite the fact that I get attacked for sharing this, because there are people who this does resonate with. But when there is no required meaning, then a lot of language changes, which is should, must, need, have to. Like, all of these things no longer exist because there is no capital M meaning. So I don't should, have to, must, need to, anything. And so a lot of the expectations that we bury ourselves into that weigh us down are just implied shoulds, have tos, musts. And so if all of those disappeared, then in a lot of ways it's very liberating. And so for me in business, it allows me to take actions even though I know that I shouldn't or must not, or other people would judge me for not doing it the way that they thought I should do it, because there are no rules, which is why that was the preface to the book. It's like, there are no rules. We can live our life whatever way we want to live it. And that's okay. I read a YouTube comment the other day. It's like, hey, you talk a lot about being sad and like, how have you been able to X, Y, and Z? And I don't identify with being a sad person. I think I have been sad in the past, but I also don't think that there's a problem with being sad. And so I think that there's just so much power in acceptance. It's like, so many people make themselves miserable because they think that they shouldn't be who they are and they shouldn't feel how they feel. And so much of the medication that gets prescribed right now is because someone's like, oh, I'm anxious. And why do we feel like someone shouldn't be anxious? They are human. Why do we feel like we shouldn't feel sad? We are human. Why do we feel like we shouldn't feel frustrated or angry? We are human. And so I think it's one of the most like interesting things or phenomena where if you have a line, which is the normal human existence, and you have points above the line and points below the line, you have the median, right? Or you have the middle point. And people want to not feel the things below the line. And then we ascribe or label the things below the line as bad and the things above the line as good, when all of it is. And so I think that if we just accept that and accept ourselves and accept the feelings that we experience as things that we experience, like rain and weather and sunshine, it's not like rain is bad, not like sunshine is good. It just is. Not like happiness is good or happiness is bad, or sadness is bad, or sadness is good. We just label it that way. And I think the labels create more suffering than anything that we ever actually experience.
Rule number 7, have humility.
The number one thing I've struggled with my entire life is ego. And it's a topic that, I don't know, I feel like it gets talked a lot more in the woo-woo world than it does in like the entrepreneur world. But, I think like ego kills profits. Pride kills profits. That's a much more quotable thing. So pride kills profits, and a lot of it is because like we care more about being right than serving the other person. And there's this quote about humility that I can't remember the guy's name, but he's the guy who wrote I think Disruptive Innovation. He was a Harvard Business School professor. I think his first name's Christian. Anyways, very, very smart guy. And he said, humility is not thinking less of oneself, but increasing your regard for others.
And that was a really useful definition for me because it's, it's not about pushing yourself down. It's about raising everyone else up. And I think that there's been some podcasts that have gone really well. Like there's a School of Greatness podcast with Lewis Howes that I think is really, really good. That's going to come out soon. There's a podcast, the Iced Coffee Hour podcast with Graham Stephan and Jack Selby on their channel, which you can check out, is I think a really good podcast. Or at least I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from it. And I was trying to look at like, what's the difference between those ones and the ones that I come off, douchier. And, I'm partially exploring this out loud with you guys because like, I don't know if there's times where you're, not coming off the way you want to, or you're like not in the right mood, or you're not the best version of you. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of making this because I think, I feel like just from the comments and the posts and the tags and things like that, like Mozi Nation, and I love you guys to death. I think there are some times where you put me on a pedestal, like I am something that I am not. You know what I mean? Like I am very flawed, and I work at it. You know what I mean? And I fail a lot. And ego has been one that I've struggled a lot with, and it was the thing that really isolated me. When I was younger. Because I definitely, and I think ego is another way of saying insecurity, of just, wanting to prove that you're better than people because deep down you don't feel like you're good enough. And so for me, that's been a struggle my entire life. And it's been just I see it much more as a war than I do a battle. You know what I mean? So, wars have many, many battles in them. And at this point, I'm definitely not undefeated. So it's much more about like, I'd like to have more W's than L's in the wins and losses column around this. And I think I've just had a lot of L's lately. And so I'll just explain to you what I think, my process of what I'm going to try and think of around this, in the future is that I'm going to try and level set before I get on interviews. And so I put a little checklist in my phone of like, hey, humility is increasing your regard for others. It's caring more about the audience. It's caring more about the other person than being right. And it's ideally just lifting up everyone around you. And it's just, I think there's just this part of me that always screams out and wants to, prove something. And I'm sure that, a lot of the material success has come from this place. And I don't think it's a positive place. I think it's a negative one. Or rather it's an emotion that I wouldn't say is a pull. When I say positive, negative, I should redefine it as it is an away from fuel rather than a towards fuel. Like most of my motivation has been trying not to feel like a failure in my own eyes than it is to, pull towards something. I'd like to, when I operate at my best self, I think I have more pull motivation, but I still think that there's a significant part of me that is driven away from things and driven away from pain.
Rule number 8, live in the moment.
I love the saying, in our 20s, we're concerned about what everyone thinks about us. In our 40s, we don't care what anyone thinks about us. And in our 60s, we realize that no one was thinking about us to begin with.
Right.
And I just feel like who else have you thought about today besides yourself? Probably not. You have your kids, which is an extension of yourself, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Not a lot. And so most people are like that. And, a lot of it, like we have a lot more leeway than I think we give ourselves credit for. And I think the more that I have now, I'll say accomplished with quotes in material success, the more I am excited about the things that I can do. And that was why the opening of the book was like, there are no rules. Mm-hmm. And it just took me a very long time to realize that. And I continue to unlearn rules that I thought existed,
yes.
As I continue to, go on this journey.
Yeah, I love that idea of unlearning.
I think we all just try and go back to being like we were when we were children. Just because when you're a child, you're purely present, right? You're just present in the moment. Yeah. And I don't like the word happy very much. I prefer using joy because you can mourn joyfully, mm-hmm. right? Because it's internal rather than happiness, which I feel is more like happenstance. It's more from external. And so, what are the things that bring me joy? What are the things that I find joy in? And I think for anyone who's listening, it's a much harder question to answer. What are the things that bring me joy than answering the question, what are the things I hate? And it's easier to correct those first. You're like, well, I hate my job and I hate my relationship and I hate the city. Okay, those are all very changeable. And a lot of times you get there by inversion. Well, if I wanted to destroy my life, I wanted to have the worst life possible, what would I do? And then taking all those things that you would do to really destroy your life and make your life miserable and then reverse them. It's a much easier way to solve the positive psychology equation, in my opinion.
Rule number 9, manage your feelings.
I actually don't think about it much. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time and effort trying to figure out how they feel because they want to then judge or label themselves as I'm doing well or not well, Like a lot of effort goes into saying like, how do I feel about this? I mean, my follow-up question would be like, why do you care? Why does it matter? And that's why when you asked way long ago about like, how much do you think feelings matter? I don't think they matter at all. Like, what would the case for feelings mattering be?
Then why do you believe they exist?
It's a good question. And it gets really interesting because it's like how I experience a feeling that I label in my head as sadness. Is it the same way you experience the thing that you, it's like seeing green and I see green and you see green. What if all of our greens are different, right? I mean, it gets very interesting like that. But I think that I experience something, and if we were to just measure it based on like brain activity and like heart rate, I would say that I become aroused in the literal sense from experiencing what I would deem as emotions. And so if we were to describe it or define the term in that way, I think I experience emotions. And so, I mean, I'm fairly confident I experience emotions. If we were to try and measure it that way, then that's how I would say, yes, I do experience them. But the question is just like, how important are they? And then it would be like, for what? If it's for accomplishment, not very important. For fitness, not very important. You know, if we're saying how important is emotion for love, which is another emotion, right? It becomes like amorphous trying to go to amorphous, but then you say, okay, well, if we're defining love by what I'm willing to endure to continue to keep something, then how important is it? Well, it depends on how much I've conditioned myself to accept this thing. So like if I want to stay married, it's probably far more effective to condition someone to stay married because that is the external consequence of a good marriage as you stay together, right? I'm just saying like we're just purely measuring from external circumstances. And so I think trying to measure and define things is what I actually geek out on and I really enjoy. I think most people get bored to tears when I talk about this stuff, so I don't talk about it much. But that's the stuff that like, when we keep peeling back layers of like, why do you think you're able to get out of, you know, a difficult place in your life? Or why do you think you were able to go through these things? A lot of it is because I believe that I will redefine terms. And so we'll have some instance or something that I should do and I will redefine it, or I'll say I don't should. I can just accept it. And that's why the biggest refrain that I have in my head for like my own mental wellness is just like, and that's okay, period. Like I don't want to go to that thing. That's okay.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is accept your mortality.
Mortality has been the single biggest driver and the biggest decisions that I've made in my life, and it has become a more routine process for decision making for me in general. Because I think it provides clarity and it provides context to most of the decisions we have, which the vast majority of them don't matter, which is helpful in and of themselves. And then, you know, beyond that, it helps me make the decisions that I think removes everyone else from the playbook. Because if you study subjective well-being and how people perceive how they're doing in their own lives, it looks like a smiley face. So 7-year-olds think they're killing life. And then it drops dramatically between 20 and 30. And then there's still a little bit more of a dip right around 45. That's like when people are their true, they hate life the most. and then it kind of slowly goes up until like 55, 60. And then it shoots right back up again when people see that they're going to die and that life is short and that they can make the decisions without worrying about the ramifications of other people. And some of the people they're worried about are also dead. And so it was using that context for that biggest decision that's been duplicated many times in my life since then, because if I have a good decision-making algorithm, I try and reuse it as many times as I can.
Most business strategies are not complicated. Find something people want, charge a lot of money for it, and deliver that thing really well, so much so that they tell other people about your product. It's not overwhelmingly complex to consider. The execution is difficult, but the concept is not. And so a lot of people think they're going to win on strategy when they're starting a business, when you could have two people who have lawn care companies and one person has a lawn care company worth $1 billion and one person that can barely break $5,000 a month. It's not because the strategy is significantly different, it's just the execution. How is it that an entrepreneur or two entrepreneurs can start at the exact same time and one can get 10, 20, 30 times faster? Or when you start over again, you can always skip these steps to get to your level of incompetence. My theory around this comes down to pattern recognition. And let me explain. It's not just pattern recognition from the perspective that you have strategies or something that you're recognizing, but actually patterns in people. And so I'm going to give this a quick story to drive this point home. I have struggled for the last decade to find an assistant. And so it's one of the things I'm actually, a little embarrassed about, but I've gone 0 for 7 on assistants. So much so to the point that I almost kind of gave up just even trying to find an assistant. And until recently, every time I had an assistant, it just always right off the bat, it just never felt like right. And I always was like, yeah, maybe it'll get better. And it just never really did. And the problem was that I didn't know what it looks like when it's right. And so
in the videos that I talk about, I use the term ideal scene. I don't know what the ideal scene of this dynamic looks like. When we are scaling companies, right? And I'll tell you what I found out there in a second, but like when we're scaling companies, what we have to do is pay down ignorance tax of knowing what ideal scene looks like, which is where speed comes from, having people who have outside eyes look in who already do know what ideal scene looks like, so you can skip steps faster. And so I'll give you an example of what this looks like in real life. Like for me, in the role of executive assistant, thank God that like for me, it wasn't a necessary thing to continue to grow the businesses. Now that I have one, I don't ever really want to live life without one. But the entire time I kept bringing people in. I didn't know what to look for. We do hiring, we do a hiring process, we do an onboarding and training process. They never really got up to speed, or we never really got in sync. And then I'd slowly kind of fall away. There would be distance, and then it became kind of awkward. And then I would end up having to cut the relationship. And so in this instance, we immediately synced up. I really like the person. I trust the person, and they are so proactive in all aspects of my life that I just sit down and start working. And then she places things in front of me. I'm like, hey, I got 13 minutes. She's like, cool, do this. And I'm like, oh, I've got, 18 minutes here. She's like, cool, do this and do this. And every time I'm done, I'm like, hey, what else should I do? And she's like, boom. And so we meet based on the priorities that I have. And then she has this big stack and knows how long every one of these things takes, because I talked to her about how long I think the task will take. And then as I have openings, we slot it in. So it's like I wake up and I'm just crushing work until the end of the day, because I know that the amount of time that's been allotted for each of the tasks is the appropriate amount of time. And if I do finish early, I get another task done, right? And so we can crush stuff. You need someone who you can trust. Like if you're giving someone your money, or you're trying to take someone's advice or counsel, you need to trust their intentions. All right. And so it's not just whether they have integrity, it's whether they have your best interest in mind. All right. So I'm going to get to how I solve for that in a second, but that is the first character trait that you need of a counsel, of somebody, of any kind of counsel, really, whether it's investment law, etc. The second is efficacy, or their skill set, right? So let's think of different scenarios here. So let's say you might trust your mom implicitly, but she doesn't have the skill of knowing much about, how to structure insurance policies or trusts or, investments in tech startups, right? She might not have that skill, but you might trust her intention, right? For you specifically. On the reverse of that, you might see that there's this person who's got lots of skill, is prodigious in this, but it also means that they know exactly how to screw you if they want to, right? Which is one of the double-sided things of being really good at something, right? You know all the details, you know how to write the agreement, structure the deals in order to make sure that you get the best outcome, right? And so the idea is to find someone who has both your best interest at heart and has the ability to deliver on what you want. Right? And so it's both of these things. And so you're like, well, yeah, maybe that seems obvious for me. Just even boiling it down to that was very helpful for me, because when I look through advisors, look for people I want to get counsel from, I have to look at these two things. All right. So here's how I test for the integrity piece. And here's how you can control for risk here. Right. One is I always try and interview as many advisors as humanly possible. All right. And I do that because I'm going to get as much information from each of the counsel during this process that will give me perspective from which to make a judgment. Right. One of the biggest problems with this, like if you think about Julie, who's trying to lose weight, right? She goes to the gym and then she talks to 10 personal trainers. One personal trainer says it's all about high fat, low carb. Another guy says, hey, don't worry about that keto stuff. It's all about high carb, low fat. And then another guy says, no, you really just need a balanced thing. And then another guy says, it's only about calories. It's only about counting your macros. And so you get this huge perspective so that hopefully you can make a judgment call. Otherwise, when you talk to the first guy and he says it's all about keto, then you're like, well, I guess this is it, right? I guess these guys all have opinions, when in reality, there is a truth. You just don't have the perspective from which to make a judgment yet. And so the first step in this is that I interview as many as I possibly can from reputable sources. So this is where I reach out to my network, I make posts, etc., to try and get as many referrals as I can. All right. So that's step one. Step two for the integrity piece is that I try and have aligned incentives. Now, a lot of times there are incentive systems that appear aligned, but are not in reality. So let me give you an example. So in the real estate market, if you're a realtor, for example, you may think, oh, this realtor has my best interest at heart, right? Because they have an incentive to sell the house. And so that is why they're going to get compensated. So they want to sell it for as much as possible. But they aren't incentivized to sell it for as much as possible. They're incentivized to sell it as fast as possible and get a deal closed. All right. And so think about this. For you, selling a house for $500,000, that's worth $500,000,
is a normal, that's normal. That's the market price, right? But for you to make an extra, let's say $25,000 or $50,000 would be really material. That would be a huge extra outcome for you. You would probably push a lot harder to get the extra $25,000 or $50,000. Now, let's say that you could probably sell it in a day at $450,000 because it's below the market value of the house, right? Now, here's what's crazy is that if a selling realtor, like total it might be 7%, 2% goes to the buyer and 5% goes to the seller. If 5% is going to your realtor, 5% of $500,000, right, is 25 grand, okay? And so for them, the $50,000 decrease to drop you from 500 to 450 means that they're going to give up $2,500. So they're going to make $22,500. So let me ask you a question. Now, the reverse, if they sell for $525, they're going to get $27,500, right? And so it's a $5,000 swing off of a $25,000 nut for them, and one of them might take them 3 months, and one of them might take them a day. So what is their incentive? Their incentive is to make as much money as possible per unit of time. And so they're incentivized to sell as fast as possible. And so this is one of those things where you have to put your thinking cap on and say, are our incentives truly aligned? And so when we're looking at this, when I say there's two aspects that I look for counsel or somebody who's going to help me do something financially, legally, insurance-wise, whatever it is. So first is that integrity piece, and are their incentives aligned? The incentives being aligned, and you could restructure that deal and say, hey, you know what? You're going to get 0% on anything below $400,000. I'll give you 3% on anything between 400 and 450. And then from 450 and up, I'll give you 20%, right? Or 15% or whatever, right? And so now they're highly incentivized to push, and now your incentives are aligned because each increment for you is worth almost as much as it is to them. And that is how you would align incentives. All right. Now, how do you test for the second thing, which is their skill set? This one's hard, all right? Especially if you don't have the perspective from which to make a judgment, which when I enter new things, when I'm trying to learn about trust, when I'm trying to learn about investment things and different vehicles, I'm learning about storage units, I'm learning about you're like, oh man, there's so much stuff and there's so much nuance that you have to have, right? And so the first thing is I like to usually read 2 to 3 books on the topic, all right? And I read 2 to 3 books just so I don't appear like an idiot. And so I can at least understand what they're saying, and they're going to respect you it's kind of like defense. If you bring at least some level of knowledge, they don't feel like they're going to take advantage of you. So this is a first thing that I do, and this is because I don't like feeling exposed in these types of conversations. The second thing you can do is if you have someone that you can trust, you can bring them in alongside you. And the third thing that you can do, which is probably the most and highest recommended, is repeating the same action I said in the first hand, which is try and talk to as many of them as possible, and then you will gather the insights and you'll see the people who demonstrate the most expertise. And what you can do is take what one person says and say, well, what about this? And see what they reply with. Right? And as you gain more and more knowledge, and this is how so in the consulting world, this is qualitative research, right? This is where you're literally doing interviews essentially to gather information so that you can make an informed decision, right? And so when you do these interviews, and this is the lazy part, this is what most people don't do, is they won't do this work. Right? They won't take the time to interview 20 people or 10 people when in reality, these one decisions, the guy who you decide to, invest in their fund, or if you decide to buy this building or invest in a fund that buys X, Y, and Z, right? Or you have somebody who manages your portfolio, whatever it is, right? That one decision can be one of the most, if not the biggest influence on your total net worth over a long period of time. And people take more time to figure out where they want to go on vacation than where they're going to put their money. Right? And so my ask to you is that if you put these lenses on, think about both of these lenses. Lens one, do I think this person is integrous? Do I think this person has my best interest at heart? And then 2, do they have the skill to deliver on that promise? Because I don't want my mom doing my investments. I know she has my best at heart, but she has no idea what she's doing. And then I don't want somebody who absolutely knows what they're doing and does not have my best interest at heart, right? Which honestly, unfortunately, is a lot more of the cases that you'll come up with. And candidly, a lot of times they're literally incentivized against you. In the insurance industry, they're kind of incentivized to rip you off. It's pretty terrible. And there's a lot of industries like that. Mortgage brokers are incentivized to rip you off. And so you really have to look at it from both lenses. And these types of decisions can make the biggest impact on your net worth and your financial future simply based on who you decide to work with. When I started in this business, I took every single sale, and it was because I was so afraid that somebody would waste the opportunity. So if you have that fear, I understand where you're coming from. Second, when I had my first sale that was not me, I just had this emotional breakdown because I was like, oh my God, this could actually happen. And I promise you, if you haven't had it happen yet, you will when it does, because you realize that this business can actually work without you and other people can make it rain too, right? And then I'll tell you a quick story that illustrates the next point that I'm going to make. So
as I, hired some salespeople, now that first salesperson, were they exceptional? No, but they were able to get the job done. Later on, I had my first kind of like killer, and his name was Mario Negretti. And he came in, I don't know, a year into the business, and he so quickly was able to assume the sales role. And to show you how laughable this is, he started, and I was about to start training him, and some lady walked in the door, and I was like, hey man, like I can take it. He's like, no, I'm good. He's like, go do your thing. He's like, fitness, nutrition, accountability. I'll figure it out. And he ended up closing this first lady who walked in the door for paid in full. And I remember walking in like completely dumbstruck. I was like, he didn't even know what the pitch was. But she walked out giggling, happy, so excited to start. And what that moment taught me was that it is good to train salespeople, but it's better to take great salespeople and then just point them in a direction. And so this has informed a lot of the thinking that I have around talent in general. And I'll tell you a couple of frameworks that have informed this. But like, if you look at Harvard doesn't produce the smartest people. They select the smartest people, and then they put smart professors in front of them, but like the base level of intelligence of everyone who's at Harvard is already exceptionally high. And so like, even if the teachers at Harvard were not exceptional, the students are, and they would be successful independent of that because their selection is so ridiculous, right? And so if we can think about our own companies that way, and especially if you're in the service business, like look at the biggest service companies out there. Like look at McKinsey, look at Bain, look at BCG, look at basically a lot of the finance world are service-based businesses a lot of times, right? And they're able to do that because they create such a pool to select from that they are able to skim for the best talent, right? I heard this quote from Esther Cathy, who's the founder of Chick-fil-A. You win the championship in the draft. And so it was such a belief that they had about picking the right people, even more so than training. And I would say that I have moved in that direction of a little bit more nature than nurture when it comes to roles, specifically sales especially. There are certain characteristics about building rapport, about having certain, dynamics or energy, whatever you want to say, that like Mario Negretti, when he walked in, he had all of these things and he didn't even know the pitch, but he won that sale off of just pure rapport. And so if I'm going to allocate the same level of time to training somebody, I might as well start with somebody who has a much higher base, because I could spend 10 hours to take someone from a 2 to a 4.5, or I could spend the same 10 hours taking someone from a 6 to a 9. And the thing is, I'm also going to get more bang for my buck in terms of my hours of training with somebody who has a natural proclivity for selling compared to somebody who does not. What's interesting about this, and this is just like my observation, is that you just have to be willing to talk to more people in the recruiting process. I will say, like, from a recruiting standpoint, there's two kind of things to look out for. If you cannot pay super handsomely based on your price points, which you need to maybe fix later. But like, if you can't pay super well for the salesperson, then you need to look harder and you'll need to interview more people and you'll need to probably run ads and use your network. If you can pay well, the best salespeople are already employed. And so it comes down to recruiting those salespeople from other sales jobs, ideally from companies just like yours, so that they already know a lot of the things coming into it. So it decreases the ramp up time for them, because all we're really doing is swapping products, and the actual sales cycle, the type of sale, is it a transactional sale? Is it a long sale? Is it a software sale? Is it a coaching program sale? Whatever it is, right? There's so few variables that we're changing that they can immediately jump and go, which also allows you to make a judgment on their proficiency faster. And so as a quick side note to this, because this is something that I've given a lot of thought, if you look at the top salespeople and sales trainers, and this is going to drive home the point that I was making earlier about it being, much of it being born, all right, is that if you look at the top people who are in the space, you look at Jordan Belfort, right? You look at Bradley, you look at, and some people would say me in terms from a selling perspective. All the guys that I know who have taught sales were exceptional salespeople day one. Bradley started selling cars when he was 18 years old and was the top salesman at 18 years old when he started. And he was like, I just found something I was really good at. Jordan Belfort talks about how he didn't know how to train anybody in his book. And then all of a sudden he, for the first time ever, wrote out a framework to explain the straight line sales system, which became his book and all that kind of stuff. But he, up to that point, it was just what he naturally did, right? And I can tell you in my instance as well, I'd already closed thousands of deals before I even consumed my first sales training. And so like, I do think that if we are selecting salespeople,
I think it's much more about selection than it is about training. The training is to remind them how good they are, not necessarily to make them good. All right, and this is something that has shifted over time for me specifically. Now, if you're like, well, I suck at sales, you can absolutely put way more time into yourself than a business would reasonably put into an employee. All right, like you have you all the time. So you can train you in all your off hours and you're spending your own time to invest in yourself. But from a return on investment perspective, it's the cost of finding a good salesperson compared to the cost of training a bad or mediocre salesperson is significantly lower. It's much easier to find the right people than it is to take somebody and then make such a crazy extensive training, unless your entire model is we just take on every single person who walks in the door. Like 24 Hour Fitness has this model. They take on anybody who has a pulse and then they put them through a ridiculous culling process, and then 10% of people make it in the first 90 days.
A lot of people, I would say, mistakenly think that the number one resource is time, right? Everyone's like, time is money, time is money, time is money. And I would argue that that's not necessarily true. I would argue that attention is money. That is the golden resource. So the billionaire friend that I have, he's actually been helping me on the new endeavor that we are launching to our gym lords soon, which I think will change the industry. Anyways, he's been helping me with that stuff. But like, here's an example. On his phone does not ring unless you are already a contact that has been whitelisted. His phone doesn't ring. He's impossible to reach. The more successful, the larger your company grows, the more you scale, the more you need to scale. And the only way to scale you is because you do have a finite amount of attention. And so what happens is you have to decrease all of the other things in your life that drain attention, because you can have as much time as you want, but if you're not there, you're not potent, you're not able, then you can't get anything done with that time that you're supposedly allocating, which is why a lot of people end up in this in-between state of always everywhere and at the same time nowhere, right? And so they're everywhere, but they're not paying attention to anything. And the reason that it's difficult to focus is because entrepreneurs, the character trait that made us into entrepreneurs is that we're go-getters, we're risk averse, we're creators, we're innovators, we're builders, right? We have all of those traits. But the difficulty is that the thing that gets you from 0 to 1 is not the thing that gets you from 1 to 2, right? And so the reason that you have to totally morph and why you have to be a growth-oriented individual is because you have to change your own individual character traits in order to progress as a business owner. And so, like I said, the things that got you here are not the things that are going to get you there. The things that got you here, which is your own internal skills, are not the things that you need to pass on to other people. So the only way that you were able to grow your business at a certain point is by growing other people, right? And the only way you can do that is if you have the attention and the bandwidth in order to do so. And that's why if you look at a business owner, and like the more I obsess on looking at billionaires and people who are doing better than we are, is I look at how quiet and how clean they keep their space. And I mean that both in a literal sense, that like their surroundings, their office, their house, their homes, their cell phone, their computers, right? It's quiet, right? Everything, like it's pristine. And when you talk to these people, there's a certain amount of tranquility that's there, and they just have very low tolerance. And it's not that they're trying to be impatient with you or impatient with the world. It's just that they understand that they have they're operating at such a high level that there's so many things that are demanding of their time and attention that they can't. And so they have to forcibly remove themselves from so many different situations. And I'm going to give you an example. So one of the people that I'm somewhat mentoring, right? They had 4 businesses, and this is something that happens so many times. Like you want $100,000 coaching? This is what happens in $100,000 coaching sessions. And I'm being honest with you. What happens is someone who's coming in, usually doing between $1 and $3 million a year, can't get past a certain point, right? And the reason they can't get past is because they only have so much attention, and they have it spread between 4 or 5 different cakes. That's when the gym owner has 4 gyms and is making less money than they did when they had 1 gym, because the amount of attention that they can allocate to one facility has gone down so much that with fixed costs, they basically are breaking even, right? And so the same thing happens. Now that entrepreneur is probably making $1 to $3 million in gross revenue, but not taking anything home because they don't have the attention to actually put onto things. And so in order to grow, you need to do less. In order to grow, you need to do less. And that comes from both delegation and also choosing what not to do. The better you get, the better the opportunities that you have to say no to. Imagine the level of opportunities that we have now. I'm just being honest. So imagine how many things we could do or try and JV with or do a partnership with or whatever because of the distribution network that we have and the trust and the goodwill that we have with the gym owners that we have in our network, right? A lot. You know how many people cold message me like, I have an opportunity for you. I'm like, really? You have an opportunity for me. And so the better you get, the better your opportunities you have to say no to, which is why becoming a higher and higher and higher level entrepreneur is more and more difficult, because it requires discipline. It's not about doing more, it's about doing less, because we innately want to do more. So doing more of your own internal characteristic, if that was what it took to be more successful, then everyone would be more successful, because it would be something that does not take effort, because that is something that we already do. It's like, man, I outwork anyone. I've got all this work ethic. Cool. That gets you from 0 to 1. It's not going to get you any further than that. So stop identifying with that. It was something that I used to identify with. I was like, I'll outwork anyone, whatever. Like, that was something that I used to think about. And it was a character trait. It was an identity thing. And the more you grow, the more you realize that your identity needs to be fluid, because what it needs to be is exactly what it needs to be at that given time of development. Because the character traits that I'm going to have to emphasize in a year are going to be different than the ones that I have to emphasize now. The skills that you need to learn, like delegation, leadership, those are things that are not the things that take you in the beginning. You have to be independent. You have to be hustling. You have to be grinding. You have to be willing to put in the work, because no one else will do it for you, especially if you have no capital to start, which most of the people who are on here are in that situation. To reel this back in, the number one thing that you have to be paying attention to is where you are paying your attention, right? Like, you spend attention. That's why they call it paying attention. It's because it is a resource. And most people don't pay attention to that, right? And so one of the things that a lot of people don't know about me, this one's going to go long. Some of the things that a lot of people don't know about me is that I, for 9 months, paid a coach to teach me one thing, which was to manage my attention, was to teach me how to think. And so for 90 minutes every single day, all I did was talk about what I was thinking about. Think about that. Every day, I paid attention to where my attention was. And when I did that, all of a sudden, my business blew up, right? And I realized that I had toxic relationships. I had toxic relationships with parents. I had toxic relationships with friends or pseudo-friends, things that were taking my attention, past things that I had on my mind that I knew I had not handled. So those are called like open loops or open cycles, right? So when you have something that you like, I haven't resolved this, then you need to handle that, and you'll get that attention back, because what happens is you have this bowl, this tiny little bowl of marbles, and each of those marbles is a unit of attention, right? If you had to measure it. And so you put little marbles of attention on your childhood traumas. You put little marbles of attention on your marriage. You put little marbles of attention on your health. You put little marbles of attention on your spirituality, and then massive marbles of attention on your business. But the thing is that sometimes you need to quiet and collect all of these other little marbles so that you have more potency, more potential energy, more potential units of attention to spend on the one thing that you're trying to grow, which in this case would be your business. And what's interesting is that what happens is that things that were perceived as difficult become really easy. And I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but like if you were in college or you were in high school and you're like, man, I can't solve this problem, this math problem, and you were exhausted, and then you go to bed and then you wake up the next morning, and then all of a sudden it seems really easy. You're like, I don't know why I didn't see that before. Because attention gives you the ability to see, right? Like if you think about wisdom, right? Wisdom is an ability to see what other people cannot see, right? Two people are presented the same situation. The wiser person sees things that the other person doesn't. And how can you see better? You see better if you have more ability to see, which comes from your most valuable resource, attention. How much horsepower do you have? And so look at the things that you have in your life right now. Like if I see someone who has a messy relationship life, who's got a messy love life, who goes out every weekend and gets trashed, right? Like I can tell you, billionaires don't do that. That like the whole Tony Stark like vision of the entrepreneur is a farce. It's not true. Don't believe that. Every single billionaire, every single high-level entrepreneur is quiet, unbelievably quiet. They keep themselves completely isolated. They have a bubble around them of layers of protection. They're like for me, it's me, and then there's Leila, and then we have our COO, and then we have our executive assistant team, because we have a team of EAs at this point. We have 4 who work the next level. There's no one who has direct access to me, including our employees. No one does. And that's because it would disserve you guys, our gym owners, if everyone had access to me. The reason that I don't respond to Facebook messages is not because I don't want to. It's because I literally can't. And if I did, I would be disserving everyone, because then my attention would be split, because someone can't generate leads in their market or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, because these little things that are perceived as huge issues to you in that moment, because you have a little bit of attention, you have so little left that everything seems like an explosion. But when you have lots of capacity, big problems seem small, and small problems seem big. And it sounds reverse, because what you do is you start seeing that all of these things are attention drains, and you just say, I don't want to play anymore. And you stop playing.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag Believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video, because you are awesome. If you want to see the last one-on-one I did with Gary Vaynerchuk, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
I'm talking about something that the world thinks is a contradiction. I don't understand why anybody should ever verbally dress down an employee